favorite thing to do. Love being on camera. It's my favorite. All right, good evening. Glad you're here. We're going to be in Daniel chapter 2. If you needed notes, they're out there. Does anybody need notes that didn't get notes? Are we out already? Anybody else? We're good? Okay. Anybody need one? Steven's got one. Oh, right here. Anybody else? Everybody else good? Man, this is an amazing amount of people. I just got nervous all of a sudden. This is great. Glad you're here. Here's what's great about Daniel chapter 2. It is going to help us in the study we just had with Revelation. You're going to see a lot of similarities tonight that you're like, oh, that's what that is. That's what that means. And if you remember when we talked about Revelation, we briefly spoke about Daniel and how Daniel's prophecy was to be shut up and not read by anybody, but John's revelation of Jesus Christ was to be opened and read. Now that Daniel has moved on and we're at this place, now we can go back and read it, and it just ties in so well. It's pretty wild. So, with all that said, how about we pray? God, you are good and you are wonderful, and I appreciate just your kindness towards us in the moments where we feel burdened, lost, sad, hurt. You have a unique way of turning all of that into joy and peace and contentment. Because ultimately what happens in this world is going to stay here. And we know that because of where our hope lies, we will rest in eternity and all will be just fine. And that brings us peace. That brings us contentment. And so we thank you for all of that. Thank you for always showing up in the unique ways that you do to remind us of just how big you really are. And tonight is no different, as we are going to read and see you show up in massive ways for Daniel and his guys. I pray that you would allow us the opportunity to have the vision that Daniel had, to see you at work when really no one else could. I pray that you would protect our conversation, protect all that's said, protect how we hear things and how we say things, so that you can get the glory and honor in all things. In Jesus' name, amen. So Daniel chapter 1 took us where Daniel and his guys, probably around the age of 15, were taken captive. They were taken to Babylonia, where they were made eunuchs, and they were to serve at the request of the king. They were going to have a 3-year period of just being taught, educated, basically reprogrammed into the Babylonian way, and then they would be used to be of the king's service however he saw fit. So in chapter 2, we find that Daniel and his guys have kind of survived the onset of everything, and we're pretty much into the 3rd year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. Now, if you'll notice in verse 1, what does it say? In the 2nd year of Nebuchadnezzar. But I just said it's in the 3rd year, didn't I? Well, in our notes in just a minute, you're going to see that the Babylonians kept time as it goes with the kings a little bit differently than we do. So it really is actually the 3rd year of his reign, even though they say it's the 2nd year. And again, we'll get into that in our notes in just a little bit. So let's look at verse 1. It says, now in the 2nd year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. Notice that that's plural. This is not a one and done dream. Sometimes we all have crazy dreams, right? With us eating pizza, you might have a crazy dream tonight, because sometimes pizza does that. But a lot of times when it's a recurring dream, it could be that maybe it's something playing in your psyche. Maybe it's something that's playing out in the world itself. Maybe it really is God trying to speak to you and get your attention to really focus on something. Or it could be just something deep internal that you're wrestling with. We never know really what it is because there's no real manual on that. But we notice in this instance that King Nebuchadnezzar was having trouble sleeping. He had big dreams. And his spirit was so troubled that his sleep left him. So this dream, unnerved him so much that he just had trouble sleeping. It could be that he had trouble falling asleep in hopes that he wouldn't have that dream. It could be he had no trouble falling asleep, but when the dream hit him, it woke him up and he had trouble going back to sleep. It doesn't matter either way of how it happened. The reality is this king, which is the most powerful king on the face of the planet at this point, is having dreams, and these dreams are so important to him that he's losing sleep, whether it's at the beginning or the end or just losing sleep altogether. So Nebuchadnezzar actually was just a simple chieftain to begin with. Somehow or another, he was able to unite several tribes. They overtook the Assyrian Empire, the Syrians, as well as Egypt, and he somehow found himself as one of the world's largest empires at that time. He just was able to rule and reign in a way that suited him. And so he's taken over as this power because the Babylonians were just powerful. And again, it's the second year. So here's how we get that. It is accession dating. The Babylonian way of dating their kings, the first year would not count. I have no idea why, but for whatever reason, they just did not count their first year. So really, when we talk about his second year of reigning, it's actually his third year, which helps us because when we're reading our timeline, we know that the Daniel and his guys were in a 3-year program. They were training for 3 years. Remember in chapter 1 where it says they're going to be set aside for 3 years? Well, if he's already in power and already being looked to be one of the wise men, would he really be looked to be a wise man at the second year? That wouldn't make sense to me. It doesn't make sense at all, actually. And so this timeline fits, even though it says something different. It's still the third year of the reign. He's further along. He's at least gained some ground where we'll see in a moment he'll be able to go before the king without dying and actually entreating with him to be able to interpret the dream. So the troubled in his sleep. We'll find out later on that what he was seeing was he was trying to figure out what this statue meant, this massive statue. And if a king such as this had the power that he had, what else do you think he would be worried about? How long am I going to reign? Who's going to come kill me? How am I going to lose my kingdom? How long am I going to have my kingdom? How long will I be able to reign this way? These are things that I'm sure were on his mind. And when he had this statue, and the statue is phenomenal when we look at it, it bothered him because he couldn't understand it. He couldn't make sense of why he's having this dream over and over and over again. And it just didn't make sense to him. So let's go to verses 2 and 3. The king gave the command to call the magicians, the astrologers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans to tell the king his dreams. So they came and stood before the king, and the king said to them, I have had a dream, and my spirit is anxious to know the dream. Again, it's intriguing to me that he says dream here, but in verse 1 it says dreams. So it lets us know that it's the same dream that's happening over and over again, and it's boggling his mind. It is bothering him to the point he can't sleep. And now he's called his smart guys, the wise men. All the men that he has placed his trust in, all the guys that he's invested in, all the guys that he really trusts that will tell him what he needs to know. And he's calling them in so they may help him understand what this dream is all about. And he needs answers to his dreams. And there's 4 classifications that he calls. He's got the magicians. Now, in our terminology, in our world, we know magicians would mean magic, but in this instance, that's not what it means. The Hebrew root word would be a style or pen, and so they're more scholarly than magical, okay? So when we see magicians here, we're talking about more scholarly than magic. Then you've got the enchanters, and that is exactly what you think it is. These are the ones that communicate with the dead. These are the weird guys, the oddballs, the astrologers that look to the stars to tell them all the things that really probably don't exist. Then you've got the sorcerers. These are the ones that practice the black magic, the sorcery, the communicating again with the dead and trying to get things out of them to try to help them understand the world, which I don't know why you'd want to talk to demons, because demons are a bunch of liars and trickers, and they're not going to tell you what you need to hear anyway. So that's what King Nebuchadnezzar is basing his decisions on, these men who are absolutely spiritually misguided. And he's depending on them to guide them in the right way. And then we have the Chaldeans. These are, again, wise men, and they're just a group of astrologers that really come from the southern portion of Babylon. And again, these are the most experienced and educated, although spiritually misguided. Now, Nebuchadnezzar he's conquered a lot, but he's also been given this power. And he may have inherited a lot of these wise guys. Nebuchadnezzar is a young guy. He's not super old, but probably most likely a lot of his wise men, these 4 groups of men, might be a little bit older than him. And so it could be assumed that if I were an untrusting person or a man with great power, and I had a bunch of older men trying to lead me, it could be that these men were trying to convince me to do things the old way. And so why would I trust these guys? If I think it needs to go this way and they're so used to the old way, it would be hard for me to trust them. I don't struggle with that, but you could see where it could be. You got to remember, this is not a believing world here. These are sinful men not trusting in God, trusting in other gods. And so they have no reason to trust. They don't even really understand what true trust and putting faith in another person really looks like. And so I can see King Nebuchadnezzar just having an attitude of, I don't trust anybody. I'm not trusting nobody. And so this dream is so extraordinary. He knows it has importance. And so he calls these men in to say, hey, I need to know what this is. In fact, it's not just that he needs to know. He just wants to know. I want to know. You have to tell me. Verse 4. Then the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic, and that's super duper important. We'll come back to that in just a minute. They say, O king, live forever. What does that sound like? Yeah, they're just buttering him up. Tell your servants the dream, and we will give the interpretation. They make an honest plea with him. He says, tell me what my dream means. I need to know what it is. And they say, fine, tell us what it is. We'll be happy to help you figure out what this dream is at, but you got to tell us what it is. But notice in the very first part of that verse, it says that they spoke to him in Aramaic. It is a change from the Hebrew language to Aramaic from this point, chapter 2, verse 4, all the way to the end of chapter 7. Now, that may seem not odd to you, but it actually is, and here's why. Aramaic was the common language of the court. It was the common universal language at that time. And so for these men, for this story, to switch gears from Hebrew, which was predominantly Jewish language, to Aramaic, which was common for everybody to be able to read, Daniel knew exactly what he was doing because he wanted to make sure everybody was able to see the story. He wanted them to know that this was about God and nothing else. And he didn't want it just for the Jews or just for the Gentiles. He wanted everybody to know it. It's the international language because this chapter, especially chapter 2, but this whole book deals with God's rule over the Gentiles. He is he is laying out plainly, this is what's going to happen. Now, we have the privilege of knowing that from start to finish, it's talking about the end times. It's talking about what's happening right now and what's coming. They're not there yet. They don't even know what the dream is yet. Only Nebuchadnezzar has seen the dream. Nobody understands what it is, but Daniel's going to come back and help them see this is actually what's happening down the road. And so it's important that this language be used to where whoever reads it from this moment forward is going to be able to read it and understand it. I find that fascinating. And so they just simply say, tell us the dream. Tell us what the dream is. Verses 5 through 9. The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, my decision is firm. If you do not make known the dream to me and its interpretation, you shall be cut in pieces, and your houses shall be made an ash heap. So now he's changed it. The first request was, tell me what my dream means, right? Now he's saying, you know what? If you're as good as you say you are, if you're as smart as you think you are, if you really are my wise men, then not only tell me what the dream means, but tell me also what the dream is. And if you don't, I'm going to cut you up in little pieces and roast you over the fire of your house. Not really, but we're going to burn your house down. Verse 6, however, If you tell me the dream and its interpretation, you shall receive from me gifts, rewards, great honor. Therefore, tell me the dream and its interpretation. This king is an equal opportunist. You tell me what I dreamed and what the dream is, I promise you, you will not regret it. But if you don't tell me what the dream is and what the dream means, I promise you, you will regret it. Can you see the up and down roller coaster of emotions with this king? Which most people in power have that, right? Verse 7, they answered again and said, let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will give its interpretation. So these wise men are like, we get it. We want to do that. But you got to tell us what it is for us to give you this interpretation. Verse 8, the king answered and said, I know for certain that you would gain time, because you see that my decision is firm. If you do not make known the dream to me, there is only one decree for you. For you have agreed to speak lying and corrupt words before me till the time has changed. Therefore, tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can give me its interpretation. He basically accuses them of sabotage. He's like, I know what you're doing. You're biding time to where you guys can go back and make a plan to tell me the exact opposite of what's going to happen, to make me look foolish, to make me lose the kingdom, to where you guys can have the power. I've got it all figured out. Which that's not what they were doing. I mean, seriously, if I told you, hey, I had a dream, I want you to help me figure it out, Phil. But to do that, you got to tell me what it is and then tell me what it means. There's nobody in their right mind that would say, yeah, I'm going to agree to help you with that. It's impossible. Unless God intervenes. But for us physically, emotionally, there's no way, there's no logical person that would take that on. And yet this king is demanding that is exactly what they do. He makes sure that he wants them to tell him what the dream is and what it means, because he doesn't want them to make anything up. And he's trying to validate their skill by telling both the dream and interpretation. In other words, if I've invested all this time in you, and you've spent all these years learning the Babylonian way and studying the stars and talking to the dead and doing whatever craziness that you're doing, you should be able to do what you say you can do. If you really are my wise men. And again, maybe these are older, established wise men. Maybe some distrust due to the age difference or not enough time together. But he's emotionally up and down. That's how bad this dream has got him messed up. You ever had something on your mind so much that you can't figure out where you are emotionally? That's where he's at. He's just goofed up. And these are the men. These are the guys he's supposed to be able to come to and say, give me some consolation on what I'm dealing with. And he's not getting it because they seem to be stalling. And he challenges their loyalty and their honesty. And then he basically says, otherwise, you're going to die and I'm going to burn you up, burn your house down. Verses 10 and 11, their response is so good. The Chaldeans answered the king and said, there's not a man on earth who can tell the king's matter. Therefore, no king, lord, or ruler has ever asked such things of any magician, astrologer, or Chaldean. It is a difficult thing that the king requests, and there is no other who can tell it to the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh. The men recognize that this is an impossible task, that there's no one else that can do it. I love how they say it. They basically look at the king and say, King, seriously, do you even hear what you're asking us? There's no king in their right mind that would ask this of their wise men. These statements are really bold to the most powerful king at this point in time, but it's an honest statement. They're trying to be as honest and real. I really genuinely feel that these guys were pouring their heart out like, dude, we want to help you. Like, I don't want to die. I don't want to be cut up in pieces. I don't want my house to burn down. I want to give you what you want, but you got to meet me somewhere here to where I can help you get what you want. But he's like, nope, not happening. And they admit that only the gods can. Now, unfortunately, they are still misguided, but they realize that this is a supernatural thing that has to take place. There's no possible way that anybody could read into someone's dreams and know exactly what that dream is. It's not possible unless something supernatural happens. So verse 12, for this reason, what reason? Because they are refusing to help, essentially. For this reason, the king was angry and very furious and gave the command to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. He is beyond angry. In fact, he is so angry, in that moment, a rash decision is made, is the decree is done, go get them. Go kill them all. Kill them all. He sees that this investment that the Babylonian Empire has made into these men is not paying out. So he's like, what use are you? You're done. Killing you all. Verse 13. So the decree went out, and they began killing the wise men, and they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them. Now here's what's sad. We don't know how many of the astrologers and magicians and those guys are there, right? But their inability is not only going to cost them their lives, but all the wise men. And Daniel and his guys have only been there how many years now? 3. And they are included in this routing. So even in Daniel and his guys, with only 3 years of investment, they are going to be. Now here's where some debate kind of happens with verse 13. Is in verse 13 it says, they began killing them. Well, there's a lot of debate that says, well, maybe they hadn't started yet. Maybe they didn't kill anybody yet. Maybe there was time of planning of how it was going to go down. They're not convinced that they started yet. I'm going to say that I think they started picking them off one by one, however they could. But I don't think it was a mass gathering. We're going to gather them all together and kill them all at the same time. If it were me that was doing it, I would just do a little bit at a time and have some examples. This is what's coming down the pipeline. This is what's going to happen. We have no clue, no idea of really what's happening except for how it is written. But if you look at the rest of the passage, we see that Daniel actually goes back to the king and kind of stops it, which means either it never started in the first place or he just was able to stop it from wherever it had gone. So that's the first 13 verses. That was really a lot. Any thoughts or questions or smart remarks at this point? Everybody okay? We're not even into the deep stuff yet. Do you see the dilemma? These guys really want to save their lives. They really want to do right by the king, but they can't. It's out of their control. Just like many of us want to do right by Jesus, but on our own, we can't. It's out of our control until we give our control over to him and trust what Christ has done on the cross. Then things start to happen. So let's see what happens in verse 14. 14 and 15. Then with counsel and wisdom, Daniel answered Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon. He answered and said to Arioch, the king's captain, why is the decree from the king so urgent? And Arioch made the decision known to Daniel. So Daniel finds out about this decree. And he goes to the guy that's over basically the military, maybe even Secret Service, because these are the men that are going out killing all of the wise men. And he goes to him and says, dude, what is going on? Why has the king made such a rash, quick decision? And Arioch explains it to him. Arioch's a little bit of a multitasker. So not only is he over the military, but he's also over killing the wise men, kind of keeping everything in control. And Daniel simply questions the hastiness of the king. There's never anything wrong about thinking through or trying to understand decisions that are made. Amen? I think it's important to have conversations in the right place, in the right time, with the right attitude to try to understand, why is this decision being made? Daniel is not asking because he doesn't like the king or doesn't trust the king or had some bad dealings with the king. Daniel's asking because his life's on the line. Like, this is out of my control, so I'm going to do whatever I can to try to save myself here and my guys and really all the other wise men, because why is the king making such a rash decision? Maybe over the 3 years, he's never seen the king make this kind of decision. It's so out of the ordinary that at least Daniel says, wait a second, whoa. Why is the king so upset? So obviously we see that Daniel's a very perceptive young man. a very confident young man in what he sees and how he sees things. And so he goes to the leader and say, dude, help me understand why the king is so jacked up. Verse 16. So Daniel went in and asked the king to give him time that he might tell the king the interpretation. So after the conversation with Arioch tells him, hey, listen, the king is just upset. He tried to go to some of his wise guys, whether they're the older group, younger group, doesn't matter. He went to some of the wise men. They couldn't help him. They couldn't tell him what the king wanted to know. And Daniel's like, well, I'll give it a shot. I know I can. Just let me go. And so he ends up in front of the king. And he tells the king, hey, you know what? I can do this. Let me do this. Verse 16, he seeks the king's approval for a visit. He's young. He's exuberant. He's got nothing to lose, by the way. Right? He's going to die anyway. So why not take a shot? And he asks for more time to be able to interpret the dream. I love that. And notice in verse 16, what does it say? That he might tell the king what? What was the king asking for, though? The dream and the interpretation. But in that conversation, he has convinced the king that I will do what you're asking. I just need a little bit more time. And so the killing probably ceases, or maybe the planning phase stops, and he gives time to Daniel. 17 through 23. Daniel went to his house, made the decision known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions, that they should seek mercies from the God of heaven concerning this secret, so that Daniel and his companions might not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Then the secret was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. So Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel answered and said, now listen to this prayer that this young 18-year-old captive man who's been made a eunuch, who's been jerked away from his family, who has really right now no chance of living because the decree is out that all the wise men are going to die. And he has sought the Lord to know a man's dream and what it means, and God gave it to him. And this is a mature Christ, a God follower, an 18-year-old young man in the most dire circumstances. Listen to his prayer. Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. And he changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and raises up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and secret things. He knows what is in the darkness, and light dwells within him, or with him. I thank you and praise you, O God of my fathers. You have given me wisdom and might, and have now made known to me what we asked of you, for you have made known to us the king's demand. That is an impressive 18-year-old kid with nothing to lose. So he goes back and gets his guys and says, guys, here's the dilemma we got. Here's what the king's saying, and if we don't do it, we're going to die. So guys, we need to get on our face before God, and we need to pray like there's no tomorrow, because there's no tomorrow. We need to pray. And I love what it says. What does it say? That they might seek mercies from God of heaven. Now, why do you think it's written that way? Why didn't they just say from God or from our Lord? Remember what it's written in? It's written in Aramaic for others to read. And so he's making the distinction that the God of heaven is different than the gods that the Babylonians worship. It is a clear distinction. It is a strong distinction. And it is written intentionally just for that purpose. So Daniel goes to his guys. They go to the Lord together. They desires the mercies of the Lord, and they acknowledge him as the only one who can. They don't talk about it with each other. They don't go talk to their other buddies, all the other wise guys. They don't write a letter home. They go straight to the one who knows the answer. I just love the confidence that Daniel has to go straight to the king and say, I'll get you your answer. Just give me some time. And he doesn't go home and twiddle his thumbs until it hits him. He goes to the feet of God and says, I need help. I need what you have. Instead of panicking Love this. They go to pray. What do we normally do? We panic and then pray. Or panicky pray, right? These guys aren't panicking. They're just being patient and praying and waiting. Love it. Daniel the answer is given, and he immediately takes the time to say thanks. Think about this. This kid's life is on the line along with his buddies. He gets the answer that will not only save his life, but all of the wise men's life. And what's the first thing that he does? He takes a few moments to thank God. Now, that's an 18-year-old kid. I'm 45. I'm not always that fast. And I should be. As soon as I get an answer, as soon as I get direction, as soon as God fixes something or does something spectacular, instead of running and telling everybody, which I should at some point, my first response should be to what? Thank God. He's the one that did it. I'm not smart enough to figure this stuff out. And that is exactly what Daniel does. He didn't wait for his buddies. He didn't call his buddies over and say, hey, we need to have another prayer meeting. He just automatically in that moment says, you know what, God, you're the man. You're awesome. And I appreciate it. And notice in there, all the glory goes to who? Straight to God. Straight to the Lord. Any thoughts on 14 through 23?
Think of the way they were carrying out this decree. It's almost like, okay, he gave the decree, but Daniel went to carry out.
Yep.
He didn't just pull out a sword and kill him.
Because he should have, technically. I mean, the decree from the king says, kill them.
I think there was more to it. It could have been like more of a systematic, okay, go get these guys, bring them in before the king, tell me the dream, nope, you're dead. Next group,
could be, yeah.
Come in and Daniel busts the line and says,
hey, wait, yeah. That's a good point, Stephen. Stephen brings up the idea that it could be that it was a systematic way of taking out these wise men. Maybe it's a group at a time that would come before the king, and if they couldn't, then they lost their life. And Daniel said, time out. We're gonna speed this up. We're gonna fix this real quick. Yeah, that's a good idea. Sure. Anybody else? Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Whatever it was he exactly said, and the tone he said, it was definitely full of grace.
Yes, Colossians 4:6 tells us that when we answer, it should be seasoned with salt and with grace. And I wholeheartedly agree with that, Sarah. I think Daniel, in the way that he approaches everything, is very gentle, very kind. I mean, even in the first chapter, he could have went to these guys like, I'm not eating that, but he doesn't do that. He says, you know what? Let's try something different. Would it be okay if we did this just for 10 days? And if it doesn't work, okay. But if it does, then let's keep doing it. Yeah, I think every opportunity he had, I think there was just a gentle humility and a maturity in this kid that it's very rare. Just very rare. It can happen, should happen, but it's just rare. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
All he wanted was dream and into the dream. But he talks a lot in his prayer about, things that he's learned.
Mm-hmm.
A lot that he's learned. Things that Chaldeans said at the end of the book, he said, I've heard of you, but now my eyes sees you, and I despise myself, and I kind of makes me think Daniel's been well versed in the scriptures clearly, but he's given a vision from God, and he understands a lot more practical stuff, and he understands God put Nebuchadnezzar in place. God will remove him because the dream showed these kingdoms.
Sure.
God is a dispenser of wisdom and knowledge. Knows everything, nothing's hidden.
That's a good point. Ed brings up the idea that in Daniel's prayer, he is actually calling out more than what he asked for. And a lot of times when we ask for things from God, we usually, for the overall arching premise, we usually kind of get that if it's within his will, but there's always more attached to it that we learn from. And I think that's your point, is in this moment that Daniel is praying specifically, tell me the dream and the interpretation, God reveals to him so much more about himself. And so in this prayer, he's like, okay, thank you, but here's really what I got. Here's what I noticed even more. And so I thank you even more for that. That's a good point, Ed. Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Sarah?
And I was going to say too that, like, he immediately realized that that's the vision from God. Like, he wasn't, you would think there would be a sense of panic and like your self-confidence would like tell you like this is what it is. Like, he like, and I got the vision, we're good. Like,
Right. Yeah, because sometimes we second guess ourselves when we ask for things and then God really does answer it. We're like, I'm not sure. But these guys were like, oh no, that's got to be it. That's got to be it. Yeah. Yeah, because he didn't go back and say, okay, hey guys, I got it. Let's pray again to make sure. I mean, he didn't pull a Gideon, right? I mean, he just said, I got it. I got it. So there had to be some type of confidence in the way that the answer was given to him, especially, I guess, in that night vision, probably was a little more different than he normally had been accustomed to. Sure.
They worded it
Right.
this could have been unbelievable.
Yeah, absolutely.
This could, very well eliminate any idea of confusion.
Yep.
Here it is. You're awake. You're present. Let me show you this little TV screen.
That's a great point, Stephen, because there's actually some debate on, in the night vision, was it a dream or was it while he's praying, while they're all praying, does God reveal to him in his mind in a vision, in however, TV screen or movie screen or whatever. Yeah. So yeah, it's that to me is probably more like what it is, because I know there's times where I'm praying that my mind gets taken off somewhere else and I'm thinking about other things outside of what I would normally think about. Yes, ma'am. Ann.
Well, Danny must have been very well born.
Mm-hmm.
And then he just goes to the captain of the guard.
Right. Yeah.
Goes there.
Yeah.
He must have felt pretty confident, and they had already treated well by these different folks because they thought they loved it.
Mm-hmm.
To just go.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a very valid point, and goes back to what we were talking about with Sarah of he probably presented himself in a way too that was very pleasant. He knows he's a captive. He knows he's low man on totem pole, but he probably carried himself in such a way that they probably didn't look at him that way. So yeah, I agree. I think the fact that he went straight to the chief eunuch, straight to Arioch, and then just walked right into the king's quarters and says, hey, give me another chance. Oh, okay. Sure. Why not? Yeah, there's got to be something else going on there with him that, yeah, I agree. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am, Tatiana. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, he is always on time. But yeah, it was an urgent request. Like, it's not like a, hey, God, we got a little time. Like, just give me pieces here and there. It's like, no, I got to know it right now. Like, you got to tell me. To me, I think he was just waiting for somebody to ask.
I remember in my life, throughout my life, when there was times that I needed something quickly, the Lord totally answered.
Sure.
So that's what God, our ways are not his ways, and his timing is not our timing.
Absolutely.
He knows what he meant, and he needs to.
I'm so glad he is so patient and kind. Absolutely. Yep. Yep.
That's why I think that he didn't pray for God to reveal the dream. He prayed for God to get him out of the situation by revealing the dream. That's why I think when he says that he prayed for mercies, it's I'm in. That's how I do it. I'm in impending doom here. Lord, you're the only one that can get me out of this, and the way that you do that is through the dream. That's how when I read these, they prayed for mercies. Was like, okay, show your mercy on me by helping me in this situation, and the way to help them in the situation is through the dream.
That's a great point. And so making the connection with the fact that they were praying for the mercies from the God of heaven, not, hey, give us the dream, give us the answer.
Right.
It's, okay, you've put us here. You have us here for whatever reason. You've shown us favor. We've done so far so well these last 3 years. Now we're getting ready to die. So if you want to show us mercy and keep us useful here, then you got to give us something.
It's
Quite
showing that
probable.
God's got the control of the whole thing. It's just wherever it is He wants to go. Please give me mercy, and this is the
Sure. That's good. Anybody else? Yes, Tatiana.
Another thing, think about it, right away when the other people were talking, he said, I'm not like you, you're dead. And then when Daniel came on and asked, so again, it's a tool, just like the word of God says, that God points to the
Mm-hmm.
so he controls their heart. So God put it on his heart to delay.
Yes.
So,
The same God who gave him this dream as well. Sure. It's good. Anybody else?
How was Daniel so sure that he would have that answer? Like he said, just wait, I have the answer. Like I'll have that.
There's
So he must not been, I don't even know how he was even capable to be so confident after he got the message. I mean, I could know my trade in and out, but I'll still have that worked out.
sure.
Well, hold on. This is like life or death.
Mhm.
He just has no doubt.
Well, I think it's a matter of getting to the place where it's just straight up trust. I'm sure there was a portion at which he knew that at any point in time they could come in and take his life. It's almost, and we're going to get to the story soon, but when when the 3 guys are getting ready to be cast into the fiery furnace, the question is posed to them, are you going to bow? And they simply look at the king, the most powerful man in the world at this point in time, and said, you can do what you want. Like, you can take our life or not. We know that our God can spare us. And if he chooses not to, we're still good. And so there's an attitude of trust and faith in those statements that there's just it's almost a blind confidence of, I know God can. I mean, my favorite go-to verse of all time, well, almost, is he's able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that I could ever ask or think. Meaning I can ask for certain things, and God can absolutely do that. But what he wants to do is go about 3 or 4 levels above it, because that's what I know my God can do. And so that's where I choose to live, even with that little bit of doubt in the back that it may not work out. I still trust that if God chooses to, he absolutely can. And so that's where I see him being. I'm sure there was worry. If he wasn't worried, he would not have gone to the king to say, hey, give me a shot. But because he knew God and had already probably experienced numerous things by God's hand in being captive, that confidence just grew. I mean, the fact that they were made eunuchs, but still gained favor in sight of everybody that was over them, I'm sure they knew that God had them well taken care of. And so it's a growing thing. It's a practice thing. And honestly, Greg, it is a choice. It's a flat out choice. I mean, we know Daniel 1:8 said what? He purposed in his heart. He chose that no matter what, he was not going to let his life be anything other than a witness for God, period. And that's what it boils down to. So when you ask, how do I know? That's how I know. There's just a quiet confidence there. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
First group requested from the king give us some extra time. And he said, no, you're just trying to
Yeah.
And Daniel comes along and says, give us some more time. He said, okay. When I think about it, I wonder what happened. I don't know.
Sure.
But I'm sure the king was taking inventory. How many wives do we have?
Right.
How many do we have now? 33.
Yeah, that could be. That's a great point. Pastor Lasco brings up the idea that the first group of men that were called in, they asked for more time. They literally asked for more time. Like, just give us some time. And King said, no. And so by this time, when Daniel comes back in, he asks for time as well. And the king's like, yes. And so it could be he was running out of wise men. there may not have been any more land to overtake to bring in captives anymore. Maybe he'd taken all the Jewish kids he could. Who knows? But yeah, that's a great point. What was the change in heart? Was it the Spirit of God living in Daniel that propelled him into saying, you know what, there's something about this kid. I don't know. That's a great thought. Thanks for bringing that up. Yes?
He went back and forth with those guys.
He did.
No.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Mhm.
You know, he just got fed up. You only go back and forth so many times.
Yes, it's just enough's enough.
That was Daniel's first time.
Yeah,
He was done.
Yep.
He tried 5 more times, but the other guy,
could have been. And who knows the spirit in which those guys came in? Yes, sir.
I think we got to remember that you got to try and just-
Oh, 100%, yeah.
Where things seem that we should have went the other way, they didn't. Why didn't they? Because God was involved.
And Phil, that's such a great, wonderful point that God, we always leave God out because we try to make sense of it in our own way. And the reality is, we literally could spend the rest of the night trying to figure out why did he turn so quick on his guys that's probably been around him forever and be okay with this 18-year-old, 3-year captive and just be okay with him. We'll never, ever know, except for the fact that God had it planned out. That's a good point. Anybody else?
I'm
Yes.
wondering if, because it says that Daniel asked one more time, then he went to the king the interpretation. So I almost wonder if God had already told Daniel it's a statue, and maybe Daniel said, king, it's about a statue, but give me more time and I'll interpret it for you. And at that point, maybe the king, I mean, obviously, just, because then later it says he was seeking mercy concerning the secret.
Sure.
So maybe he already had a sense that it was a statue and it was enough for the king. God was in it, so obviously. It was
Sure.
that
So,
but that could have been a very real thing on why he said, okay, you can have one.
so Sarah's going off the idea that when he goes to the king and he says, let me tell you the interpretation, that potentially maybe God had already revealed the dream to Daniel. And so when Daniel said, hey, I know it's about a statue of some sort, let me go back and figure out the interpretation of this thing. And so that's very plausible. The only thing that I would put a check mark by is why would they not have included that little tidbit? You know what I'm saying? But I think it's more plausible than anything else I've heard before of that. Maybe he already knew. Maybe he already knew. I don't know. George, good thought, Sarah.
I was just thinking that maybe the king was thinking, well, this guy has enough guts to come to me first and say, can we change food? And look how that turned out. Maybe this guy has enough knowledge.
That's true, George. The fact that he had to call his first group in is one thing. But this guy just said, you know what? I'm going straight to the king and address it right here, right now. And the fact that he had already done it, because I'm sure word got to the king that this guy, like, how do you look so good? Well, he actually talked us into changing the diet, and we didn't tell you because we didn't want to die. But so that's what his idea. And so maybe there was some growing admiration for this young man who had the confidence that he had. Again, we have no idea, but it's fun to think it through and kind of talk it out. Tatiana? That's all right. Yep. The whole chapter? Oh. Yes. So I'm glad you said that, because in Daniel chapter 1, 19 and 20, it talks about when the king interviewed them, he saw that they were 10 times better. What I looked for when I was studying this is I was hoping it had said that they found favor in they had found favor in the king, or king had placed favor on them. And it doesn't specify that, but it's implied because he realized that these guys were a little bit head and shoulders above everybody else. And if it had said they found favor in the king's eyes, it would have helped me see that, or be okay with the fact that he could just walk in to the king and say, hey, give me another shot. Give me time. Mr. Lasco?
Verse 19 says, then was Bill. Didn't know it when he went to the king.
Yes. And so when the secret, what Sarah was suggesting is maybe the secret was the interpretation and not the dream and the interpretation. But it's, for me, the secret holds that he didn't know anything because it was a secret. It was a secret to everybody. I mean, nobody knew except the king, and he only knew half of it, the dream part. So yeah, good point. Yes, man, you guys are so talkative. I love it. This is good.
Summarizing what I heard from
Yes.
from the other, there's something that calls reputation. So 3 years have been passed, he must build a reputation.
Sure.
That he's trustful,
Mhm.
right guy.
That's good. Absolutely. And that confirms what we see in chapter 1, verses 19 and 20, because the king already from the get-go saw that these guys were different. And I'm sure that didn't change all the way through those 3 years of training that, okay, there's something going on with these guys. Anybody else?
Another thing, kind of similarity, is kind of like, or my thought process, kind of like the difference of the Pharisees to the disciples. You know, the Pharisees were these humble,
The smart guys. Yep.
smart guys, but nobody liked them, and they had a bad attitude. They came off the wrong way. Where you had the disciples who were just everyday people that the people were,
Sure.
liked, and they were more personable, and they weren't these people that were way up here above everybody.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good point. Yep. Anybody else? Yes.
Well, the first group, when they came for the thing, they pretty much said, well, nobody can do that, give us more time. So it seemed, that King was already suspicious that they were going to explain something against him.
Sure.
And when David came, he said, I will do that. So
That's a good point. The approach and the way the two men came, or the two groups came, was different. The first group said, ain't nobody going to do that, king. But Daniel said, I will do it. I can do it. Anybody else? Yeah.
Also, the king's mindset, he desperately wanted to find out.
That's true.
locations.
That's true.
So if Daniel comes in, he came in without being called in and says, I got you figured out. Give me a little bit of time. I'll do it, whatever it is that you want me to do.
Right.
And the king, who I've got to get this resolved, maybe said, okay, you're coming in with confidence. You're going to do the whole thing.
Sure.
Do it.
That's a great point, Bill, because at this point, I would imagine he's probably just exasperated, because we're not told that the dream stopped. And so if he's losing sleep and having this recurring dream, and then finally somebody comes in with just a little bit of confidence of, I can tell you what this is. Yes, please, fine, yes, whatever you need, go do it. Sure. Yes, Tatiana.
when you read the Old Testament, the Word of God always says, when he does miracles, and he always said that they may know.
Mm-hmm.
In the Old Testament, all other kings, other rulers knew Jehovah as a God of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder if he heard of that God. Now he wants to find out, okay, let me hear those Hebrews, what they have to say. You know what I mean?
Could be.
Because throughout the history, they all knew about it, and some of the kings that I read about it, they wanted to rub it in, prove it that God of Israel is not alive. He's not real. You know what I mean?
Yes, and I that's a great point, because we always see kings recognizing somehow, some way, whether they're following him or not, they at least say, yes, we see that there's a God of Israel that's just different. But I wonder what the conversation was between Daniel and King Nebuchadnezzar that first time when he comes in and says, I can do this. Because it's not stated that he says, I will go to God, or I will use my God, or I will seek my God. But obviously, there could be some validity in the idea that King Nebuchadnezzar knew that these men were different, just different. And maybe he was tired of these other gods. They weren't working quite well. So let's give this guy a shot. Yeah, good. After. Yeah, oh yeah. So one of my points in our notes is the fact that he leverages this opportunity to be a witness to God the entire time. He lights the king up. Dude, what you've asked us to do, ain't no man on this planet gonna be able to do. but God can. So, yeah, but we're not going to get to that tonight. Great job. Good discussion. This is fun, right? This is only half of chapter 2. All right, so we'll finish up chapter 2 next week, so don't lose your notes. Hi, Maria. Oh, great. Say that one more time.
Who said that we need to have it? He wanted information.
Sure.
Just around the whole.
But your initial question threw me off, and I almost didn't listen to anything else you said because I was trying to make sure I heard you right. But I got everything you said, but it was the squirrel in the back that wouldn't shut up. Did you say that, who's to say that the king didn't have a dream? Daniel chapter 2 actually says that. Because in verse 1, it talks about that he was troubled, that his sleep left him because he had dreams. So it was a dream that was jacking him up. However, I do think the other side of your argument is super valid because, yeah, he wants to hear it. He needs help. It's the reason that he's losing sleep. He needs somebody to give him some wisdom and discernment, which is why he goes to these wise guys and they can't give it to him. Which is so important that we have the right kind of people around us all the time. Yeah.
At the end of 23, when Daniel closes his prayer,
Yeah.
he says, thank you, God, you gave me the vision, basically, you built on us. So he says, it's me. But it was through us.
Yes.
It wouldn't be all of us being you, you answered our prayers.
Yes. I'm glad you brought that up because, again, at the end of the prayer, he talks about us because it wasn't just him praying. It was him and his guys, his boys. And I love that at the end of this chapter, when he gets elevated, what does he do? Hey, I got these 3 guys back here that they are like just like me. Like, you got to bring them along. And I love that because so many times we get so caught up with our own stuff that we leave the people that help us get to where we are behind. So that's a great point. Great point. Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Chapter 1, verse 4.
Yeah.
It says, the king didn't choose just any people. It says here, right? But who can give that in wisdom, possessing knowledge, and quick understanding.
Mm-hmm.
So he's something new about these are special people. Yeah, don't pick just any.
Yes. Don't get all the dummies.
And there were the nobles and king descendants.
Yes. They were very well educated and very, very smart guys. Yes. Good point. Anybody else? Go for it.
Go off what Dr. John said. Nebuchadnezzar's pretty new here.
Yeah.
He's a new king. He's young. He's trying to figure stuff out. And he's got all these people with all these guys, and he don't know who to trust.
That's true.
And he may be also kind of in the back of his mind, okay, your guy don't work, so I'm getting rid of you guys. We're gonna go until we find God does. And then he kind of, I think, steers in that direction.
He does.
Like, okay, this guy works, so that's where we're gonna go. So he may, a lot of it's probably just him
Learning on the fly.
trying to figure out what's real and what's not.
Sure.
That's a really good point. Daniel was more in his peer group, more like a teenager. He don't want to listen to old dudes. He's like a teenager. So this teenage guy over here saying, well, bring it, go ahead.
That's funny. Okay, we'll end on the gray bald-headed note there. All right, let's pray. God, again, you are so good. I love the way that you just have given us the freedom to talk things out and to discuss and to think and play with ideas. But God, ultimately, we want to hear from you. We want your wisdom. We want your knowledge and understanding. And please give us discernment to see things that are important, to discard the things that aren't, but to be safe in the idea of this is a living document that is continually growing and helping us to be who you have created us to be. So thank you for who you have had here. I do ask that you continue to be with those that are struggling physically. We know that we've had a lot of loss in our church lately, whether it's been inside our church or maybe extended family. And I know that there are a lot of families that are hurting and struggling. I just ask that your hand be on those, both physically, emotionally, spiritually, that you would do a magnificent work in the hearts of those that would hear from you. Thanks for all that you do. Keep it safe as you go home in Jesus' name. Amen. Have a great night.